Hello, my name is JD McShane. I am a third-year student here at Western Oregon University, and for my final, I wish to kind of talk about the Deaflympics and its social movement and kind of how it helped really support the deaf community back when it was created in the 1920s and even still today. Kind of a context, since this is a um, public project and one that I will post to YouTube here when we're done recording. Um, this Our project is kind of centered around what we've learned and how we've learned through this term. Um, this is a Communications 260 here at Western Oregon University. Um, it's kind of we've throughout the term talked about how sport has been used as a platform to help promote social change and social movements. That's anywhere from, cricket and colonialism a very long time ago, all the way to just recently in the last decade or two, soccer in the Arab Spring in the Middle East and Egypt. I'm skipping about 100 years there of history between civil rights and, deaf and trans rights in sports and that kind of stuff. That even to this day, talking about it in December of 2024, women's and trans rights are still a very big issue, and I know many of my peers are talking about that. But, you know, overall in the social movements course, one thing that hasn't really been talked about in our course and something I wanted to kind of look at a little bit more was disability rights as a whole, and specifically deaf, deaf participation in sports at an international level, domestic level, all of the above. I'm actually an interpreting major here at Western Oregon University for American Sign Language, which is the United States and kind of Canadian Mexican sign language. They've got their own too, but not to get into the technicals of that. But yeah, so I thought, what way and better way to combine those two worlds than talk about the Deaflympics and how they've supported the deaf community and how it's really created a social movement still to this day. Um, so first, kind of give some context on what the Deaflympics is, because I know I've been talking for 3 minutes now about the Deaflympics, and I never knew about them until about 2 years ago, and I've been part of sports for a decade and part of the deaf culture and deaf community in terms of learning the language and learning around the community and how to support them for 5 or 6 years now. Um, but basically, the Deaflympics was founded in 1924, and they are in a in a simple sense the Olympic Games for the deaf and hard of hearing. Um, that's not necessarily a great way to put it, but um, you know, they were the deaf community, and those who were great athletes were really always kind of taken away from the Olympic Games and considered, why would I put you in there when I've got a hearing person? And so, who I'll talk about next, they're the two founders and pioneers of the Deaflympics, wanted to create their own games, and now today they are recognized. The Deaflympics are a true organization that runs winter and spring games, or excuse me, winter and summer games, and they're recognized by the International Committee of Olympic sports, and just like the Paralympics and the normal Olympics, they are a recognized international game, who can give out medals. And yeah, so to kind of talk about more of a brief history, um, founded in 1924, the Deaflympics were created by a deaf cyclist named Eugene Rubens Alisis. I apologize. I've been working on this project for a week and a half now, and I still can't find how to pronounce that. But Eugene Rubens from France, and then also a deaf tennis star from Belgium named Antoine Dressy. The two of them were really credited with being the first to create the International Silent Games, which that's what that was called in the 1924 when they started in Paris with their 148 athletes in only 68 sports. It was a summer game that took place in 1924. Then called it the International Silent Games because they brought in several athletes from international from very different countries to Paris. Um, and eventually, it's become what is today the Deaflympics, and which is part of the greater Committee for Sports for the Deaf, or International Committee for Sports of the Deaf. I'll talk about that here in a little bit. Um, but yeah, it's kind of a brief history of how they've started. Kind of going into more about Eugene Rubens. He was between him and Dressy. The Rubens was really the one who really got the ground running with the first International Silent Games. And of the two, they were both equal pioneers, but Rubens really did a lot of the front work and the groundwork to get it going, and so he's kind of credited as the 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 big the big first pioneer, so to speak, if you had to put only one name to it. Um, and by creating the Deaflympics, Rubens really helped break the stigma and at least start to kind of break the ice around stigma for the deaf community. But more so, he was deaf himself, and he was noticing the discrimination, the segregation, all of the negative things that were happening to the deaf community around sport and just in general. Um, Around that time, to give some context into the deaf community, sign language was being suppressed. Around that time, there were fights about education. There were fights about a whole lots of different things. And the deaf didn't really ever get too much of a say around what was going on to their community, their culture. And then add that to the fact that even still to today, it's a hearing world first, and it can be hard to be deaf in a world that's not designed for you. And so Rubens really thought, what better way to help both myself and those in the deaf community find a sense of belonging, identity, um, drive, community passion, all of that. Find that through sports. And not only just inclusion in hearing world sports and hearing community sports, but also through your own dedicated games and own dedicated community of what is now the Deaflympics. Um, and I think that's a great segue into talking kind of about how between the 1920s and when the Deaflympics started, even to today, how the deaf community has really been such greatly impacted by the Deaflympics and its founding and its continued playing. Um, so, kind of for context, I called this section of the presentation the silent movement. Kind of, a little tie to social movements, but also, the deaf community and how, we sign, or they sign, um, they don't speak necessarily. So, uh, but really the silent games were started, like I kind of talked about, around around kind of thinking how the they were socially and intellectually inferior to the hearing population. They were not allowed to be. They were looked down upon, really. And there was a lot of fear and discrimination towards the deaf community. And there is such thing as inclusion, and the Deaflympics really helped start to show that and show that we might be deaf, they might be deaf, they might have hearing, they might not be able to hear, but that's really the only thing that's different between the deaf community and the hearing community. And um, kind of a quick pause here. This image is from I have sources that show where I got all my images from, but this image in particular on this slide is from a website called Deaf Websites, and this is art from a deaf artist who I just Googled deaf sports and community, and this was one of the first things that popped up. And so it's by a deaf artist, and I really thought that this was just a great way to kind of visualize how much sports can be an identity for anyone, and how it was even more so an identity for the deaf community. Um, but anyway, the Deaflympics, when it was founded, and to still this day, have created a place for those that are deaf to express themselves, to build an identity and culture around sports, and honestly, it helps empower them and helps show to those that are being discriminated against, who are being told they don't belong in the world and in the culture and society that they are in, that you do belong, and that, play sports and build a surrounding around your sports. Um, this is a big thing also in the hearing culture. I mean, I have been around and have worked in sports for almost a decade now, and it builds me as an identity myself. So so being in a place where the deaf have that as well, it has really helped create internally in their community and their culture a sense of belonging and empowerment themselves, and that has spilled to the greater community. Um, they have used this platform. Eugene, Antonio, all of the athletes of Deaflympics, they have, through Deaflympics or through other international deaf games, if that is, through their domestic channels or just in general, throughout the years, participating in these games has helped break the stigma, and it has helped them get through 100 years of discrimination and really help build what is now, you know, it's not perfect. It's hard to, especially in an international level, build a perfect community and a perfect culture, but it is definitely better than 100 years ago when, we were trying to suppress sign language, and a large part of that is thanks to the Deaflympics and the international, silent games, and just in general, having a sense of belonging and community for the deaf community and those that are deaf in sports helped empower them to then, in their society and in general, show that they do belong and that they are not different and they are just like all of us. And that, while there wasn't necessarily a specific movement, like, in 1968 for the civil rights, you can point to the Olympic boycotts and, all of that to a specific movement. There wasn't necessarily that one specific movement around the Deaflympics, but just their continued perseverance in inclusion and, you know, showing the world they can be just like anybody else, that they can have their own culture, their own community, but also be a part of their communities they're living in that are designed for the hearing, who are, you know, they're surrounded by hearing peers and mentors and friends. They're not any different. And the Deaflympics was really one of those first platforms that empowered all of these athletes in the greater deaf community to really start that movement. And while there is not a specific point in time that you can point to that says the Deaflympics was a platform that, this happened because of this, by empowering this community, they felt like they belonged. They felt like they could continue and that they were, they did belong. And over time, that integration and that helping of supporting them and empowering the deaf community really helped show that, maybe we are treating this community and this culture differently, and we shouldn't be. So yeah, I will link my sources, all of the content sources I used, and each slide I will kind of what image I used and where I got it from. You can also scan that QR code. It goes to a public Google Doc as well. And to kind of wrap up, I hope that I hope that we were able to kind of teach more about the Deaflympics, the deaf community, and more so just the social movements around, you know, around the deaf community and how the Deaflympics have supported the community, the culture, and supported that that the deaf do belong in society, that they are not intellectually inferior, they are not socially inferior. We shouldn't look down to them. They are equal to anyone else. Um, and I will kind of close this presentation off by saying best of luck to all of the deaf athletes that'll be participating in the 2025 Summer Games in Tokyo. Um, and I know I'll be watching this summer, and hopefully you guys can too. Deaflympics.com is a great place to kind of learn about more the Deaflympics and in general just watch the games and find out how to kind of be a part of that and see what it's all about. Though again, those links are all in that sources document. So thank you. Hopefully you can learn. Hopefully you've been able to learn some stuff. And maybe you're just a little bit more passionate about sports or the deaf community, just like I have been in these last few weeks learning about this, and last few years getting ready to be a trained interpreter. So awesome. Thank you guys.